Hey listener, welcome. I'm glad you could join me tonight. I'm your storyteller and I'll be your companion as you drift off to sleep. Or perhaps as you lie there wide awake, listening to this story, unsure if you'll ever fall asleep again. I hope you're comfortable, because I'm about to share something with you, something that's haunted me for a long time, something that still lingers, even now. I won't lie to you though, it's not an easy story to tell, but if you're ready, I'll take you back to a time when everything felt so normal. At least, that's what I thought. My name is Evan, and I was 26 when this happened. I was just like any other guy at that age, working an office job, living in a small apartment, mostly living for the weekends. Nothing exciting, nothing that ever made me feel like I was living on the edge. I had a decent social circle, just enough friends, just enough people to make it feel like I wasn't invisible, but not too many to overwhelm me. I was used to the quiet life, and to be honest, I kind of liked it that way. It all started with a backpacking trip. I'd been itching to do something different, something that broke away from my routine. So one night, I found myself scrolling through travel websites, looking for a budget-friendly place to explore. That's when I stumbled across this hostel. It was tucked away in the mountains, isolated, rustic, and cheap, perfect for a solo traveler on a budget. I knew the place was a bit run down, but the reviews were decent enough. No one said anything strange about it, at least not at first. The pictures showed old wooden walls and thick stone floors. Nothing glamorous, but that's what I liked about it. The thought of being cut off from the world for a few days had its appeal. When I arrived, it looked exactly how I imagined. A little shabby, a little offbeat, but that was part of its charm. The owner, an older man named Richard, greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He led me to a room at the very back of the building, past narrow, dimly lit hallways that creaked underfoot. The air had that musty, forgotten smell to it, like it hadn't been disturbed in ages. I told myself it was just an old building, nothing to be worried about. I wasn't the only one staying there. A few other backpackers had checked in as well, mostly young travelers like me. We were all scattered around the hostel, and we'd bump into each other in the kitchen or the common area. But things started to feel a little off, even from the start. That night, as I was lying in bed, I heard something. At first, it was just a faint scratching noise, like someone was dragging something along the walls. I told myself it was probably the house settling. Old buildings do that, right? But then it got louder. Footsteps, soft ones, but steady, like someone was walking through the halls right outside my door. I froze. I was tired, but I couldn't sleep. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was in a strange place, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But then, there were whispers. Not from outside my door, but from the walls themselves. It sounded like muffled voices, barely audible but distinct, like a conversation happening just beyond my reach. I couldn't make out the words, but I swear I could hear my name, just once, like a faint breath against my ear. I tried to ignore it. I tried to focus on the quiet of the room, on the normal sounds, the wind, the rustling of trees outside. But the whispers didn't stop. And by the time they started to turn into something more urgent, something more desperate, I knew it wasn't just in my head. The next morning, I mentioned it to the others. A girl named Sarah shrugged it off. "Old buildings do weird things," she said with a nervous laugh. But another guy, Tom, looked at me strangely, as if I'd just confirmed something he'd been afraid of. "It's the old sanatorium," he muttered, looking down at his coffee. "The place where the hostel was built. They say people used to disappear there. Patients, some say they still do." I laughed it off. "That's just a rumor, right? People love telling ghost stories in places like this. But the look on Tom's face said otherwise. The whispers didn't stop. In fact, they got louder that night, and the footsteps, faint at first, became clear, heavy, deliberate, like someone was pacing in the hallways close to my door. The shadows outside my window flickered with movement, but when I looked, there was nothing there. I started to wonder if it was the walls themselves, creaking and groaning under some heavy weight. But then I heard a scream. It was muffled, like it was coming from behind the walls, high-pitched, terrified, and then nothing. That was when I realized the hostel wasn't just strange. It was wrong. It was built on something that didn't belong to the present, and whatever it was, it hadn't finished what it came for. The next few days were a blur of growing unease. Other guests started to act differently, as if they were all sensing it too. The whispers grew more insistent. I began to notice things out of the corner of my eye, shadows moving when no one was around, flickers of movement down long, empty corridors. But when I'd go to check, the halls were empty. Then, people started to disappear. First, it was Sarah. I woke up one morning to find her bed empty. No note, no sign of where she went. The other guests hadn't seen her leave. Richard just shrugged it off like it was no big deal. People come and go around here. Backpackers, you know how it is. The next night, Tom was gone. It didn't make sense. We were all on edge, but no one seemed to care. Richard acted like everything was normal, like it happened every day. But I could feel the change. The hostel felt empty, like something was waiting. I didn't want to be next. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but I swear I could hear someone whispering my name in the walls, and when I closed my eyes, I saw those shadows, just out of sight, but always there. One by one, the other guests were gone, but they weren't replaced by anyone new. Not really. What replaced them were shadows. Figures that stood at the edges of rooms peering from doorways. They never spoke. They never moved unless you weren't looking. The last night I stayed, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't sleep. The whispers were so loud, I thought I'd lose my mind. The walls seemed to pulse with the voices, the air thick with the sense that something else was there. I grabbed my stuff and ran. I'm telling you this now because I don't think I'll ever be able to forget what happened in that hostel. It wasn't just haunted, it was alive with something else, something that had waited too long, something that needed more than just the lost souls to keep it going. I don't know what happened to the others. I don't know if they're still there or if they were replaced, but sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear the whispers. And I know that whatever was in that hostel isn't done yet. And maybe, just maybe, it's still looking for more people to replace the ones who disappeared. Be careful where you stay. You never know what's hiding beneath the surface. Story 2. My name's Emily. I'm 28, living in a small apartment in the city. At the time of this story, I was traveling on a break from my work as a graphic designer. It wasn't anything glamorous, just the kind of job that keeps you plugged into a screen all day long, creating designs for brands that don't really care about you. I was tired, so I booked a few weeks away in Europe to reset. Nothing big. I'm sure you know the type of trip I mean. The hostel I stayed at was in this quiet little town. It was nothing fancy, just a small, inexpensive spot. It was all I could afford at the time, and honestly, I didn't need much. I'm not picky, so long as I had a bed and Wi-Fi, I was fine. The place had decent reviews online. Some people said it was charming. Others said it was a little strange. But I didn't think much of it. We all know how online reviews can be. People complain about anything. The first night, everything seemed normal enough. The walls were thin, the bathroom a little cramped, but nothing I couldn't handle. The town had this sleepy, almost forgotten quality to it, like it was stuck in time. I remember the soft creak of the wooden floorboards as I walked to my room, the faint smell of old paper in the air. But I told myself I was just imagining things. It wasn't until the second night that something felt off. I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my door. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, but the footsteps were slow, deliberate. I didn't think much of it. People wander the halls late at night in hostels, right? But when I looked at the clock, it was almost 3 a.m. A few moments later, the footsteps stopped. There was a long pause, and then the sound of a door creaking open. My room was at the end of the hall, so I figured it was just someone else staying here, probably drunk, stumbling to their room. But when I tried to go back to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I pulled the covers tighter around me and closed my eyes, trying to ignore it. But it wasn't the last time I heard those footsteps. Over the next few days, things started to get weirder. Small things at first. My toothpaste disappeared from the bathroom counter, replaced by an unfamiliar brand. I thought maybe I had just misplaced it. But then, my phone charger went missing too. I'm not a particularly disorganized person, so I was starting to feel a little uneasy. One evening, after a long day of sightseeing, I returned to my room to find my door locked. Now, I know I hadn't locked it. It wasn't a big deal at first, just a small inconvenience. But when I used the key to get inside, I found the room in disarray. Nothing major, but things had been moved around. My clothes were scattered across the bed. I thought maybe housekeeping had been in. I checked the time, just after dinner. But no one had been in the room, and when I asked the front desk, they acted like they didn't know what I was talking about. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hallway outside my room felt unnaturally quiet, like something was lurking just beyond the walls. I could hear soft murmurs, voices that didn't belong to anyone I knew. There were figures in the hall, too. Tall, shadowy shapes that moved when I wasn't looking, always slipping out of view when I turned my head. It wasn't until I overheard a conversation in the lobby the next day that I started putting things together. A young man was speaking with the receptionist. His voice was shaking as he asked, "Has anyone ever stayed here for too long? Like, longer than a month?" The receptionist gave him a strange look, but didn't answer right away. After a moment, she said, "People forget who they are after a while. It's best not to stay too long. Some people leave and never come back." I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't ask him what he meant, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something about that place was beginning to feel wrong in a way I couldn't explain. And then I found the room. It was on the 4th floor, at the end of a dark hallway. I'd never noticed it before. The door was locked from the outside, and there was no number on it, just a faded, peeling sign. The walls around it were damp, and there was a musty smell in the air. I don't know why I decided to try the door. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I felt like I was losing my mind, and I needed answers. I managed to get the door open with the old key I'd found behind the reception desk. Inside, I found a room that had been abandoned for years, dusty furniture, rotting curtains, and scattered papers everywhere. There were journals, old letters, and photographs, the remains of past guests who had stayed and never left. The journals were filled with ramblings, stories of people who'd come to the hostel seeking refuge, but began to forget who they were the longer they stayed. Names, memories, faces, all of it started to blur. Some of the journals were even written in different handwriting, like the person who wrote them had become someone else entirely. One letter was particularly unsettling. It was written in the hand of a woman named Claire, dated just a few months before. She wrote, I don't know how long I've been here. Sometimes I wake up and I can't remember my name. The faces of the people I've met are fading. I wonder if I'm the one who's being forgotten. As I read, I could feel my heartbeat quicken. My hands started to shake, and that's when I realized everyone who stayed here, they didn't leave. They just faded away. Their memories were swallowed up by the hostel, and in the end, they were forgotten. I left the room as quickly as I could, slamming the door behind me. My mind was spinning, my vision blurry. I knew what had happened to those people. I knew what was happening to me. The longer I stayed, the more I could feel myself slipping away. I couldn't stay another night. The next morning, I packed my things and fled. I never went back to that town, but sometimes, late at night, I still feel the pull of that hostel, the sound of footsteps outside my door, the quiet whispering in the hallways, the nagging feeling that I'm being watched. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still me, or if I too have already started to fade, lost to the shadows of the hostel. If you ever find yourself traveling, especially if you come across a place that feels too quiet, too forgotten, be careful. Some places aren't just meant to be visited, they're meant to be forgotten. Story 3. I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me when I was in college. It's a little out of the ordinary, but you'll understand why I'm still thinking about it years later. And it's about a room, not just any room though, the room, the one no one checks out from. Now, before I get into it, let me introduce myself. I'm Claire, 23 years old, and at the time, I was living in a small, run-down hostel in a city that no one would recognize unless you went there for college. It was cheap. No frills. The kind of place where, if you're lucky, you get a bathroom without a broken shower head. I mean, you'd think at that age, I'd be used to dealing with those little annoyances, right? And mostly, I was. My days were pretty typical. Classes, studying, the occasional night out with friends, and then back to my room. The hostel wasn't exactly cozy, but it wasn't awful. You know the type. Just a bed, a desk, some chipped paint on the walls, and a few posters that never quite made it into the frame. The kind of place that doesn't feel strange, even when it is. Everything felt ordinary until I found myself in that room. Room 213. See, the thing is, when I first moved into the hostel, I wasn't given much of a choice. It was a last-minute assignment, and the other rooms were already filled. The hostel manager, an older man named Mr. Finch, was a bit distant, but he handed me the key to room 213 without a word of explanation. He didn't look me in the eye when he did it, which should have been my first clue. But back then, I didn't think much of it. At first, I didn't notice anything weird about it. It was just another room, right? But after a few days, I started to feel uneasy. And I'm not talking about the usual things, like the cracked window that didn't quite close properly, or the distant sounds of traffic outside. No, it was something deeper, something that crept up when the sun went down. I don't know when I first heard it, but I remember the sound perfectly. It was a faint, rhythmic knock. Not at the door, not on the walls. It came from inside the wardrobe. It wasn't loud, but it was precise. Always at 2:11 a.m. without fail. Tap, 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 like someone was knocking on the inside of the wooden door, but nobody was ever there when I opened it. I told myself it was nothing. Old building, weird creaks, maybe a loose board inside the wardrobe. But even as I tried to ignore it, the knocks came back every night. Sometimes they sounded like they were getting closer, other times like they were trying to hide, quieter, almost like someone was muffling them, but always at 2:11 a.m. At first, I didn't think to tell anyone. Who would believe me? I was a college student. I was probably just imagining things. The sounds were faint, but they kept happening, and it felt like they were on purpose, like they were waiting for me to acknowledge them. It wasn't until the third night, when I mentioned it to a few of my friends, that I began to realize something was seriously off. "You're probably just hearing things," Sarah told me, a little too casually. "This place is ancient, Claire. You can't expect it to be quiet. Maybe a pipe or something." "Yeah, maybe," I said, brushing it off. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was in there. I started avoiding the wardrobe, never opening it unless I had to. Every time I passed by it, I swore I could feel a presence watching me, and the knocks never stopped. Then came the first time Mr. Finch acted strange. I needed a new light bulb for my room, and I went down to ask him about it. When I stepped into the office, I noticed the door to room 213 was slightly ajar. It had never been like that before. Always locked, always closed tight. I caught Mr. Finch glancing toward the door, his eyes narrowing as if he was afraid I'd notice. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tight. A little too tight. I wasn't sure if he was nervous, but something about the way he spoke made me feel like I shouldn't ask too many questions. I let it go. He handed me a new bulb, but when I mentioned that I thought the room might need some maintenance, he just nodded and said, "You're the only one who stays in 213. You don't need to worry about it." I didn't know what he meant by that, but it made me feel uneasy. I never saw anyone else going in or out of that room. No one ever mentioned it. It was like room 213 was completely forgotten. Even the hostel staff avoided it, but the knocks kept coming, and the more they did, the more I felt like I was being watched. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and just know someone was in my room, even though I couldn't hear anything. One morning, after a particularly restless night, I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't going to let this thing haunt me anymore. I was going to open the wardrobe and find out what was going on. I waited until it was 2:11 a.m., like usual. The knock came again. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed the handle, heart pounding, and yanked open the wardrobe. Nothing. Just an empty, dark closet. But the air felt wrong, cold, even though the room had been warm just moments before. The silence was suffocating. My breath hitched. Something wasn't right. I shut the door quickly and backed away, my mind racing. Had I just imagined it all? Was it all in my head? Then I heard it again. Help. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it, but it came from inside the wardrobe. The voice was barely audible, like it was muffled by something. Someone. But there was no one there. My heart thudded in my chest as I took a step back. That wasn't normal. That wasn't something I could explain away. I ran downstairs to find Mr. Finch, my mind racing. He was just sitting behind the front desk, a tired look in his eyes as he glanced up. I asked him what was in that room, what he was hiding. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "That room's not meant for anyone. Never was." He didn't elaborate, but something in his tone made it clear that there was more to the story. It didn't matter that no one had been in there for years. That night, when the knocks came again, I decided I wasn't going to stay in that room. I packed my bags and left. No hesitation. I could hear the muffled knocks echoing in my ears as I walked out of the hostel for the last time. It's been years now, and I still wonder about that room. What happened there? Who or what was knocking from inside the wardrobe? I've heard rumors from former residents since then, but they all say the same thing. Room 213 is a place you don't want to go. It's a room that no one ever checks out from. And sometimes I still hear that knock. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me, but every time I'm alone at night, I wonder if there's someone or something waiting to get out. Listen to your gut, trust it, even when everything around you feels like it's normal. Because sometimes, what seems ordinary is the most terrifying thing of all. Story 4. This one's not a ghost story, not a monster story. It's something much worse, because it could happen to anyone. You might not want to go to bed after hearing it, but that's the price you pay for curiosity, right? So settle in, get comfortable, and let me tell you what happened to me when I was staying at a hostel one winter. It was supposed to be a routine trip, just a few nights away from home, nothing exciting. But, as you'll hear, sometimes the most ordinary situations turn strange. I was 22 at the time, living in a small town where not much ever happened. The kind of place where the streets are quiet and everyone knows everyone's name. No big city noise or drama, just the way I liked it. I had just moved into a new city for work, looking for something a little more exciting. But at that point, I hadn't gotten my own place yet. I ended up at a hostel for a week or so, just to get my bearings. It was a decent enough spot, located on a quiet street, a bit run down, sure, but it had all the basics. There was this one room in the back, at the very end of the hallway. It was tucked away in a corner with 2 bunks. The lower bunk was empty when I checked in. I thought nothing of it, considering how many people come and go in hostels. I was tired, so I tossed my stuff onto the top bunk and went straight to sleep. The first night, I remember hearing it, the breathing. It wasn't mine. I was awake, lying there, staring up at the ceiling when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound coming from the bed below me. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me freeze. I told myself it was just some other guest, maybe snoring or something. But the breathing sounded wrong. It wasn't like someone asleep. It was too deliberate, slow, steady, almost like it was trying to be quiet, like whoever was down there didn't want me to know they were awake. I lay there for a long time, my eyes wide open in the dark, listening. It didn't stop. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. I mean, I was alone in a hostel. People do weird things when they're alone, right? And maybe I just imagined it. It wasn't like I could ask anyone about it. By morning, the sound was gone, and I convinced myself it had been nothing. The room was empty when I woke up. No one had checked in beneath me. I let out a sigh of relief, feeling kind of silly. But that night, it happened again. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard it, low and slow, someone breathing beneath my bed. I sat up in a panic, my heart hammering in my chest. The bed was empty, just like it had been the night before, but the breathing, it felt so real, too real. My mind was racing. I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe I was just being jumpy. Maybe the walls were thin, and I was hearing someone else's noise through the floor. But it still didn't make sense. I stayed wide awake that night, listening to every small sound, trying to catch any movement beneath me. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I was exhausted, running on very little sleep, and the stress was starting to build up. I kept thinking about the breathing, and the more I thought about it, the worse it felt. It wasn't normal. It wasn't something I could explain away anymore. That night, I decided to check. I got up quietly, careful not to wake anyone else in the room, and I leaned down, looking over the side of my bunk. And that's when I saw them. 2 eyes staring back at me. They were wide open, just below the edge of my bed, glowing faintly in the dark. I could make out nothing else, just the eyes. They were still, unblinking, and I could feel the weight of them like they were watching me, studying me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to pull back up into my bunk, but something kept me there. I couldn't look away. For what felt like an eternity, those eyes stayed locked on mine, and I couldn't move. My mouth went dry, my heart pounded in my chest, and I couldn't even breathe. Finally, I forced myself to move. I stumbled backward, falling onto the top bunk, my hands shaking. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare. I couldn't bring myself to look again, but I knew those eyes were real. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe I'd been so exhausted that my mind had played a trick on me. But I couldn't forget what I saw. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone I couldn't see, was still there, waiting, watching me. The next morning, I packed up my things, ready to leave. I didn't care if I lost the money I paid for the room. I just needed to get out. But when I went down to the front desk to check out, the receptionist smiled at me like everything was normal. She asked if I'd enjoyed my stay. I hesitated, then asked her if there had been anyone else in the room with me the past few nights. Her smile faltered, and she glanced at the computer screen in front of her. "No," she said, "you were the only one in there." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't want to say anything else. I didn't want to know. I just grabbed my things and left. It's been months since that night, and I still think about it. Every now and then, I'll be lying in bed, and I'll hear the faint sound of breathing. Maybe it's just the wind or the house creaking. Maybe I'm just paranoid. But I can't shake the memory of those eyes staring up at me from beneath the bed. Sometimes, when I'm walking through a quiet hallway or sitting in a room alone, I'll feel that same weight, the sense that someone is watching. And for a split second, I'll think back to that hostel, to the bed beneath mine, and wonder if I was ever really alone there. I don't know who or what was beneath that bed, and I don't think I ever will. But I do know one thing for sure. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happened. It's knowing it could happen again. Story 5. Story is about a hostel, a warden, and a sound that still haunts the hallways even after 2 years. Students were always warned never to open their door when she knocks at night. The problem is, she died 2 years ago, but her footsteps still echo in the halls. I know that might sound like a cliche, like one of those stories you tell around a campfire to spook your friends, but I swear on my life, what happened to me is real. It's something I'll never forget, no matter how hard I try. So let's start from the beginning. I'm Emily. I was 20 years old when this happened, and I lived in a student hostel in a small town upstate. The kind of place where the streets are quiet, the air smells like freshly baked bread, and the only excitement comes from finals or the occasional snowstorm. I was there for my second year of college, studying history. I'm the kind of person who loves routine. Wake up, go to class, hit the library, come back and spend time in my dorm room binge-watching shows and drinking way too much coffee. My parents were in another state, so it was mostly me, my books, and the other students in the building. Now, the hostel was a pretty standard one. Nothing fancy, nothing to be scared of. At least, that's what I thought when I moved in. It was an older building, a few decades old, with creaky floors and long, narrow hallways. The rooms were small, the walls thin, and the windows barely opened. You could hear everything, people talking, doors slamming, the hum of the heaters. But what really gave the place its strange vibe was the warden, Mrs. McCarthy. She'd worked there for years. A strict older woman with a gray bun, thick glasses, and a voice that would make you freeze in your tracks. Everyone knew her, but nobody really liked her. She had a way of making you feel like you were always being watched, always being judged. I remember she'd stand at the end of the hallway sometimes, just staring down at everyone like she was waiting for you to slip up. She had this way of making sure you followed the rules, whether it was the curfew, the laundry schedule, or just the little things like keeping the hallway clean. The kind of person who'd knock on your door at midnight just to check if you were in bed. And when you heard her footsteps coming down the hallway, you learned to stay quiet. At first, I didn't really think much of it. It was just part of hostel life, right? Warden making her rounds. But there were rumors. Some of the students talked about hearing strange things at night, muffled footsteps in the halls, doors creaking open when no one was around. And then there was the one I'd overheard during a late-night study session. A senior in the common room, laughing nervously as she told another student that Mrs. McCarthy had died 2 years ago. Apparently, she'd suffered a heart attack during one of her late-night rounds. The funny part? The student claimed that no one had really noticed for a while, and her body had gone unnoticed for hours. After that, things got weird. But like most people, I shrugged it off. It was just gossip. I told myself it wasn't true. Maybe Mrs. McCarthy had just been one of those old-school disciplinarians, the type who could never really let go of the job. But then, it started happening. I'll never forget the first time I heard her footsteps. It was about a month after I moved in. I had just finished a late-night essay and was lying on my bed, the only light coming from my desk lamp. I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, clicking against the hardwood floor outside my door. My heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was just a student returning late. Maybe it was one of my roommates in the hall. But then, the footsteps stopped right outside my door. A soft knock. 3 taps. I froze. It was just like how Mrs. McCarthy used to do it, I realized. 3 taps, one after another, sharp and to the point. I had been warned never to open the door when she knocked, but this was impossible, right? I knew she was dead, or at least I thought I did. I waited for a few seconds, expecting her voice to follow. Maybe she'd remind me of curfew or ask me if I was in bed, but nothing came. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a student was just messing with me. I convinced myself to go to sleep to ignore it. And I did, mostly. The next few days were fine. Classes, study sessions, and the usual grind of hostel life. But then it happened again. Same time, same knock, 3 soft taps. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I told my friend Lily about it. She didn't seem that concerned. Probably just some weird echo in the hall, she said. You know, old buildings make strange noises. But I could tell she didn't believe that herself. She looked at me with this weird, hesitant expression, like she was unsure whether to tell me something. She eventually did. It's just, well, you know about Mrs. McCarthy, right? I nodded. Yeah, I've heard the rumors. She died, right? Lily bit her lip, glancing around before speaking again. There's something else you should know. Some students, they say she still makes her rounds. I don't know. It's probably just a coincidence, but the knocks are always the same. Always. I laughed nervously. You really believe that? It's probably just someone else knocking, or... No, Emily, she interrupted, her voice lower now. Listen to me. Last year, a friend of mine heard it too, and she opened the door. There was no one there, but the next day, the floor was wet. Like someone had walked through the hall in damp shoes. The thing is, no one had left their room that night, not a single soul. Her words stuck with me, and it wasn't long before the knocks came again, each night a little later, a little more deliberate. But I never opened the door. I couldn't bring myself to. It wasn't until one night, about a week after I last heard the knocks, that things took a darker turn. I woke up to a strange noise. It was that same soft tap. But this time, it didn't stop. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, my heart thumping. It was almost 2 a.m. I stared at the door, waiting, holding my breath. The knocking went on, rhythmic and precise like a heartbeat from the other side. But no voice followed, no order, nothing. Then the knob turned, slowly, quietly. I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. My hands were shaking. My breath was shallow. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. The door creaked, just barely, but it didn't open. I don't know how long I stayed like that, staring at the door, hearing nothing but my own racing pulse. Finally, after what felt like hours, the knocking stopped. The silence was deafening. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. In the morning, I went to the front desk, but they told me nothing was out of the ordinary. Mrs. McCarthy had done her rounds last night, they said, but there's no reason to be concerned. Old buildings make noises. But I knew. And from that day on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I walked down the hallway, I felt her presence behind me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear those 3 taps in the back of my mind. 2 weeks later, I moved out of the hostel. I couldn't stay there anymore. I don't know what happened that night, but something tells me I'll never understand it. It's been years, but sometimes I hear those 3 taps when I'm alone at night, and I wonder if I made the right choice. So listen, if you ever hear someone knocking in the middle of the night, don't open the door. Don't even get out of bed, because there's a chance they might not even be alive. Story 6. This happened a few years ago when I was a freshman at college. I just moved into a dorm, and it was supposed to be a fresh start. Everything was new, the place, the people, the way I was supposed to live. My family wasn't far, but this was my first time really being on my own. My mom had warned me, of course. Don't trust everyone, be cautious, keep your wits about you, she'd said. At the time, I brushed it off. College was supposed to be a safe, exciting place. I didn't need to be paranoid. But that's the thing, right? Sometimes you don't realize that you should have been paranoid until it's too late. It was early September when I arrived at the dorm. Nothing strange about it at first glance. I had a decent room, not the best one, but it was fine. I shared it with a girl named Claire, who had moved in a week before me. I was told she was quiet, a little reserved, but that she kept to herself. That was good enough for me. I wasn't exactly a social butterfly either. I remember the first night I saw her. She was sitting on her side of the room, hunched over a notebook, writing something. It was dark by then, but the desk lamp on her side was on, casting a yellow glow. Her back was to me, and she didn't seem to notice when I walked in. She was wearing a veil, not a full-on hijab or anything, just a thin see-through fabric that covered most of her face, except for her eyes. I thought it was a little odd, but I didn't say anything. Maybe she was just shy, or it was some kind of religious thing. I told myself I was being ridiculous for even thinking twice about it. I didn't even get a chance to say hello that night. She barely acknowledged me. I sat on my bed and unpacked the last of my things, trying to make the room feel like home. I tried to peek over at her once or twice, but I couldn't see much through that veil, just the outline of her face. Her eyes never left her notebook. Days passed, and I tried not to think about the veil. It felt weird at first, like I was living with someone who was a little distant, maybe. But who cares, right? College dorms are full of weird people, and it wasn't like I had a better way to start conversations with her anyway. We didn't really talk much. It wasn't until the 3rd night that something started to feel off. I woke up in the middle of the night for no reason, maybe just a noise or a shift in the air. When I opened my eyes, I saw Claire's side of the room was dark. I could have sworn she'd been awake, though. The desk lamp was still on, the faint hum of it filling the silence. I turned my head toward her bed. She was sitting there, facing the wall, with her back to me. I figured she was just doing something on her phone or reading, but when I looked again, I felt my stomach twist. The veil, it was still there, hanging loose over the edge of the bed. Claire wasn't wearing it. At first, I thought maybe she had gotten up to go to the bathroom or something. But then I heard something, a soft shuffle, like someone shifting in their sleep, but it was louder than usual. I rolled over to check the time on my phone. It was 3:16 a.m. Why wasn't she in bed? I had a weird feeling crawling up my spine. I didn't know why, but something about the veil hanging there like that felt wrong. I pulled the covers over my head, telling myself it was nothing, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. My eyes kept darting toward her side of the room, and I swear I heard the softest giggle. I told myself I was imagining it. Just nerves. The next morning, Claire was there, sitting on her bed, the veil draped over her. She didn't speak, but she nodded as I walked past her to grab my things. I didn't mention anything about last night. It just felt too weird, like I was crossing some invisible boundary I shouldn't touch. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling. She wasn't right. There was something off. I decided to do what most people would do in my situation. Nothing. Ignore it. She wasn't hurting anyone, right? But the longer I stayed, the more the unease built up. Over the next week, Claire started doing things that made me question my sanity. Every time I came back to the room, she was there at her desk, writing. Sometimes the notebook was open, sometimes it wasn't, but her gaze was always fixed on it. Her hands were always moving, though. She never looked at me, and when she did, it was through the veil, just the shadow of her eyes peeking out. I'd caught her looking at me once or twice, but when I stared back, she quickly looked away. It started to feel like I wasn't sharing the room with a person, but with a presence, someone who was always there, but never truly there. I didn't want to confront her. I didn't want to be the awkward guy who complained about something as silly as a veil. Then, one night, I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a knock at the door. It was barely audible, but I heard it clear as day. I walked to the door and opened it, expecting maybe a neighbor or someone from the floor. No one was there. I almost shut the door, but then I froze. On the floor in front of the door, there was a piece of paper. I picked it up, and it was a single sheet with just a few words written in neat, slanted handwriting. Claire hasn't been here for 2 months. My hands trembled as I read the note over and over again. The feeling of dread hit me like a tidal wave, and my pulse pounded in my ears. I glanced toward Claire's side of the room, expecting to see her sitting there, watching me. But she wasn't. The desk lamp was off. The bed was empty. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The room was so quiet, except for the sound of my heart in my chest. What was happening? Was I losing my mind? I couldn't take it anymore. I found the RA and asked about Claire. The response: she hadn't been there for 2 months. Apparently, Claire had been reported missing by her family. No one knew what had happened to her, and I was the first person to mention her name since. I don't think I've ever felt fear like I did in that moment. I left the dorm that night and didn't come back until I had a new room. The strange thing? No one could ever explain why she'd still been there. Her things, her clothes, her books, were gone by the time I went back to clear out the rest of my stuff. But the veil? It was still there. I still don't know who or what was in that room with me. But sometimes I wonder if Claire ever really left at all. These days, I don't trust anyone I meet. I'm always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if I'm really safe. Because sometimes, the people you think you know, well, they aren't who they say they are. And sometimes, the scariest part of a story isn't what happened. It's what could still be happening. Story 7. This story is a little different. It's about something that happened to me not so long ago, something that still keeps me up at night, thinking about how fragile our sense of safety really is. It's about a girl I saw on CCTV, a girl who shouldn't have been there, and the terrifying things that followed. Let me introduce myself. My name's Mark. At the time this happened, I was 24, living in a small town near the outskirts of the city. I worked at a hostel, not one of the big flashy ones you see in touristy spots, but a quieter place. It catered mostly to solo travelers or small groups passing through. You know the type, people who needed somewhere to crash for the night but didn't care about luxury. Just a place to sleep. My job was pretty ordinary. I worked the night shift, managing the front desk, handling check-ins, and keeping an eye on the building with the help of our security cameras. Most nights things were dead quiet. The occasional late-night arrival, a few people heading to their rooms, maybe some snoring coming from the dorms. You get the picture. It was a routine, uneventful life. I'd never had anything strange happen, at least not until she arrived. It was a Tuesday night. I remember it clearly because there had been a slight drizzle earlier in the evening, and the sound of raindrops hitting the windows had a sort of calming effect. It wasn't the kind of night that would make you think something sinister was lurking. The hostel was unusually quiet, and I was just about to sit down with my coffee when I noticed something strange in the security monitors. We had cameras in nearly every hallway, and there was one that looked out over the main corridor where the rooms were. Around 3 a.m., I glanced at the screen and saw something that made my stomach turn. A girl. She was walking down the hall, moving slowly, her head down like she was lost in thought. Nothing unusual about that, except she wasn't wearing a hostel-issued wristband. I checked the system, but there was no record of her checking in. I double-checked the bookings for that night. Nothing. No late arrivals, no new faces. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was just a guest who checked in earlier that day and hadn't grabbed the wristband yet. Or maybe she was one of the workers from the hostel next door. I knew most of the regulars, but when I looked closer at the footage, something felt off. The girl's movements weren't casual. It was like she was wandering, her pace slow and deliberate, as though she was waiting for someone to notice her. Her clothes were ordinary, just a hoodie and jeans, but her expression, it was hard to make out, like she wasn't entirely there. I felt uneasy but pushed it aside. I'm not sure why, but I didn't want to overreact. She could have been lost, or maybe there was an explanation I wasn't seeing. I went back to my coffee and tried to shake it off. But then I saw her again. The next night, same time, same hallway, same look on her face. I watched her wander, slow and aimless, as if the building belonged to her. This time, I wasn't going to ignore it. I checked the system again. Still no sign of her checking in. Still no booking. I couldn't let it go. So I grabbed my keys, went down to the hallway where I'd seen her, and checked all the rooms. I knocked on every door, told people it was just a routine check. Everyone was asleep. No one had seen her. The hallway was empty. She was gone. I was starting to feel like I was losing it. It was just a girl, right? Could have been a new guest, a stray, or someone who didn't want to be noticed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. And then it happened again. The girl, in the same place, at the same time, walking down the same hall. But this time, something had changed. I could tell she was looking directly at the camera. Her eyes, God, those eyes were wide, almost vacant, but there was something in them, something I couldn't place. My heart raced as I froze, watching the footage. She stared at the camera for a long moment, her expression unreadable. And then, she did something I'll never forget. She smiled. A slow, unsettling grin that sent a chill straight down my spine. I couldn't tell if it was a normal smile or something wrong. Like she knew something I didn't. I grabbed the phone, dialing the manager's number in a panic. She wasn't picking up, so I left a message. I was shaking, trying to get a grip on myself. My mind raced, replaying everything I'd seen. Was it a prank? Was someone messing with me? But I knew deep down it wasn't a prank. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept watching the footage over and over, trying to make sense of it. I even called the cops, hoping they might take me seriously, but they didn't seem to think it was a big deal. The next night, she was back. But this time, she wasn't alone. I saw another figure in the background of the footage, someone taller, maybe a man. He was standing still, as if waiting. I couldn't see his face clearly, but the way he was positioned, half hidden in the shadows, felt like he was waiting for her. Like they were both waiting for something. I didn't know what to do. The police had been useless, and I couldn't tell anyone else. My coworkers laughed it off when I tried to explain, saying I was working too many late shifts and was probably seeing things. But it wasn't just that. I knew something was wrong. Finally, after days of sleepless nights, the girl stopped appearing. But the feeling didn't go away. I started noticing things out of place, small things at first. A chair moved slightly, a light flickering when no one was near it, strange noises coming from the hallway late at night. Then, one morning, I woke up to find a note under my door. It was simple, written in a neat, almost clinical hand. I know you're watching me. I'm watching you too. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I read it. I knew, deep down, that it wasn't over. I left the hostel shortly after that. I couldn't stay in that building anymore. I didn't even want to talk about what happened. But it didn't stop. I've moved now, a few cities away. I thought leaving the hostel would be enough to put it behind me. But sometimes, late at night, I still catch myself glancing over my shoulder, checking the hallway through the cracks in the door, because you never really know who or what might be watching. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happened. It's knowing it could happen again. Story 8. I've been holding on to this story for a while now. It's been years, but every time I think about it, the same feeling of dread comes back. So I guess I'll share it with you now. I hope that doesn't make me sound crazy, but I have to get it out. My name is Alex. At the time, I was 24, just a traveler like so many others. It was the summer of 2018. I was working some dead-end office job in a city that was slowly suffocating me. So one weekend, I decided to get away. I booked a solo trip to a tiny village in the countryside, somewhere remote enough to disconnect from everything. Just what I needed. A break. A place where nothing was familiar. I took the bus out there, and it felt like a world apart from the usual chaos of the city. The roads were narrow, winding through hills and forests. No stores, no distractions, just green fields stretching for miles. When I arrived at the village, the quietness of it all felt almost eerie. The air was thick with stillness, the kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're being watched, even when there's no one around. I hadn't booked a specific place to stay, but after a couple of hours of wandering, I found a small hostel that seemed decent enough. It wasn't anything fancy, just a rustic building with a wooden sign and a few other travelers milling about. It was peaceful, calm, and that was exactly what I wanted. The woman behind the counter was nice enough, old, gray-haired, maybe in her 60s. She welcomed me, showed me to my room, and told me I could do whatever I wanted. There was one thing, though, that immediately caught my attention. Next door to the hostel was another building, much larger, almost decrepit-looking. I could see through the window, old, dusty furniture, long-forgotten luggage stacked up in the corner, curtains torn and hanging loosely. It didn't seem to be in use, but I noticed a faint light flickering through a crack in the window. I asked the woman at the desk about it. "Oh, that's the old hostel," she said, her voice flat. "Been closed for years now. It's dangerous. The structure's not safe anymore. We keep the doors locked up tight." She seemed to shiver when she said that, but maybe it was just the cold air from outside. "Why is it still standing?" I asked. She gave me a weak smile, like she didn't want to go into it, and quickly changed the subject. But I could tell there was something off. It wasn't just the building itself. It was the way she spoke about it, like she was trying to forget that place. I let it go. I didn't have much of a choice, right? This was the only hostel in town. So I settled in. The bed was comfortable enough, the room quiet. I didn't think much of it, but a part of me kept glancing toward the neighboring building, the one she had mentioned. That night, I decided to take a walk around the area. It wasn't much, just some empty roads and trees, but I ended up near the abandoned hostel again. The door to it was slightly ajar, like it had been waiting for someone. I felt a pull, something I can't explain, but it was like the building was calling to me. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door. I knew I shouldn't, but something inside me wanted to see what was inside. I convinced myself that it was just an old, forgotten place, nothing dangerous, just abandoned. So I pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with dust and everything was eerily still. It smelled musty, like the air hadn't been disturbed in decades. The furniture was all there. Old wooden chairs, cracked mirrors, faded wallpaper peeling off the walls. But what struck me the most was the luggage. There were bags, suitcases, and even old hats piled in the corners of the rooms, like the people who had stayed here had just left in a hurry. I wandered through the hallways, my footsteps echoing on the creaky floorboards. It felt wrong. The further I went inside, the more it felt like I was trespassing into something I shouldn't be a part of. But curiosity got the better of me. I stopped in one of the rooms, the door hanging open just slightly. Inside, there was an old bed with a yellowed mattress, a small lamp that had probably once been beautiful, and a wall covered in photographs. I leaned in, trying to make sense of the faded faces in the pictures. But something about the room didn't sit right, and that's when it happened. A voice, soft and barely audible, whispered from the corner of the room. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. I didn't move. My heart pounded in my chest, but the longer I stood there, the more I felt watched. I turned around, expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. Nothing. Just silence. I shook my head, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The place had a strange energy, sure, but I was probably just overthinking it. I backed away slowly, ready to leave. But as I turned to go, something stopped me again. The door to the hostel was closed. I hadn't closed it, I was sure of it. It had been wide open when I entered. I reached for the door handle, but before I could touch it, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air had shifted. Suddenly, everything felt wrong. That's when I heard it again. The whisper. Only this time, it was louder. "Stay with us." My heart skipped a beat. I turned around, my breath catching in my throat. The room looked different. The walls were darker, the air heavier. The photographs on the wall seemed to move, the faces staring at me, following my every move. And as I backed toward the door, I saw the faint outline of a person standing in the corner of the room. Not a living person. Something else. I panicked, my hand shaking as I grabbed the door handle. It wouldn't budge. The room seemed to pull me in like I was stuck in a loop. I tried again, harder this time, pulling and twisting. Finally, the door opened. I stumbled out into the hallway, my breath coming in short gasps. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, I realized something worse. The hallway was different. It was the same hallway, but somehow it was wrong. like I had walked into a memory that wasn't mine. A moment was repeating, over and over again. I looked at the door to the room I had just left. It was open again. I ran, and I didn't stop until I reached the main hostel. I don't know how, but when I reached the front door, everything snapped back into place. The cold, the silence, everything. It was as if nothing had happened. The old woman was still behind the desk, as if I hadn't been gone for an hour. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept hearing those whispers, the same ones. I left the next morning, and I never went back. I don't know if I imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was exhausted, too far from the world I knew. But I've always wondered, what if the two hostels were connected? What if, by stepping inside the old one, I triggered something? That part still haunts me. Because sometimes, I wonder if the people who stayed there were still there too, trapped in some endless loop, like I almost was. I never saw the old hostel again, but I can't shake the feeling that it's still there, waiting for someone else, and I'm not sure if I'm ever going to sleep properly again. Story 9. This story is about a place you might think couldn't exist, an elevator that takes you to a floor that isn't even supposed to be there, a floor that's dark, silent, and cold, a floor that no one comes back from. It sounds like something out of a nightmare, doesn't it? But I promise you, I wish it were just that. I never believed in things like that, not at first. I was a normal person, well, as normal as anyone can be. My name's Alex, I'm 27 now, and back then, I lived in a city apartment building with a few other people. I had a routine, work, the occasional coffee with friends, and some quiet evenings, nothing out of the ordinary. I guess you could say my life was almost boring, safe. I worked as a graphic designer, mostly from home, so my days were spent in front of a computer screen with only the hum of the old fridge for company. My building wasn't anything fancy. It was an older structure, kind of creaky but not too bad. The elevator was the only one in the building, and it was ancient. A little slower than usual, a little noisier, but it worked most of the time. The building itself was 5 stories, but like I said, it wasn't anything special. That's why when I first moved in, I thought it would be just another boring place to live. But that was before I started noticing something strange about the elevator. It wasn't every time, but every now and then, it would stop on the 4th floor. And that was odd because in my building, there wasn't a 4th floor. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't an idiot. I checked. There were no apartments there, no doors, no signs of any kind of floor, just a dark, empty space when the elevator's doors opened. I'm not sure why I stepped out the first time. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was something about the silence. But I remember the moment the door slid open and I saw nothing but pitch black. The lights didn't even flicker on. It was like the elevator had opened up into a void. I didn't step out that day. I just froze. The air felt thick, too thick. I could hear my own breathing echoing in the hollow dark space. It wasn't right. So after a moment of standing there, I pressed the button to go up again, and the doors closed. I told myself it was nothing, just an electrical glitch, a weird quirk of the building. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about that blackness behind the doors. I didn't see anything unusual the next few days, but then it happened again. The elevator stopped at the 4th floor. I wasn't in a rush this time, so I hesitated for a moment before stepping out. And when I did, it was the same. The cold, the dark, the silence. I couldn't see a thing, not even the outline of a hallway or any kind of door. Just blackness. But this time, something felt different. I had a strong sense that I was being watched. Even though I couldn't see anyone, The air, thick and oppressive, felt like it was pressing in on me. My feet felt heavier, like something was pulling me down. I quickly stepped back into the elevator, and the doors slid shut behind me. The rest of the ride was uneventful. I went back to my floor, did some work, tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. But the next time it happened, I didn't have that choice. It was a Thursday night around 2 a.m. I'd stayed up working, as usual, and I decided to take a break. The elevator had been acting funny lately, with the lights flickering on and off, and the whole building had a strange, low buzz to it. But that night, something felt off. I pressed the button to call the elevator, and when it opened, I didn't see the usual dim lights. The elevator was dark. Like, too dark. Not the kind of darkness you'd expect from just burned-out bulbs. No, this was different. This felt wrong. I almost didn't get on. I almost turned back. But curiosity, as it often does, won out. The elevator doors slid shut, and as it started its descent, I thought I heard something, like a faint murmur of voices, far off in the distance. I told myself it was just the building settling, the wind, or maybe even the hum of the elevator's cables. But I couldn't shake it. When the elevator stopped, it was the 4th floor again. I wasn't going to step out this time. I wasn't. But when the doors slid open, the silence was so thick, so unnatural, that I felt an overwhelming urge to get off. I don't know why, but I couldn't resist. I stepped out. The floor was cold. Cold in a way I can't explain, and there was no air, no movement. It was like standing inside a room that had been locked away for years. I tried to call out, to hear my own voice, but it felt like it would just disappear into the silence. That's when I saw something moving in the corner of my eye. A shadow. It was fast, so fast that I couldn't make out what it was, but it was there, just out of sight, moving through the blackness. My heart raced. I spun around, but there was nothing but the still, cold darkness. I stepped back into the elevator as fast as I could, but the doors wouldn't close. They stayed open for a second longer than usual, and that's when I heard it. A faint, distant whisper, like someone calling my name. But there was no one there. No one. I was out of that elevator in an instant, slamming my hand against the button to take me up. When the doors finally closed, I breathed a sigh of relief, but it didn't stop there. After that night, things got worse, much worse. I started hearing things, the faintest sounds, footsteps in the hallway, whispers when no one was around. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then I saw them. The shadows. They were moving again, not just in the elevator, in my apartment, in the corners of rooms. And sometimes I'd wake up to find my door slightly ajar when I knew I'd locked it tight before going to bed. I tried to tell my neighbors, but they didn't believe me. "It's an old building," they'd say. "The elevators are glitchy." Some said I was just hearing things, that I was tired. But the whispers didn't stop. Neither did the cold. And then came the night when I decided I wasn't going to wait anymore. I was going to confront it. I waited and waited, and finally, one night, I pressed the button to the 4th floor again, and it stopped. The doors opened, and I stood there, trembling, but I had to know. I had to see what was there. I stepped out. This time, I didn't see the shadows. I didn't hear the whispers. Instead, I heard something worse. Nothing. The silence was suffocating. The air was thicker than before. I started to turn around to get back in the elevator, but as I did, I felt it. Something touched my shoulder. I didn't look back. I just ran. I don't remember how I made it back to my floor, but I never went near that elevator again. I moved out a week later, found a new place, and that was the last I ever thought about it. But now as I sit here telling you this, I can't help but wonder, what happened to the people who stepped off? What happens to them on that fourth floor? I think about it sometimes late at night. The whispers, the darkness, the cold. The way it feels like something is just waiting for you to step off. And I wonder if I'll ever hear those whispers again. Sometimes, the scariest part isn't what happened. It's knowing it could happen again. And the next time you step into an elevator, I hope you'll remember this. Some floors weren't meant to exist. Story 10. Hey there, sleepy soul. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to help you drift into a deep, uneasy sleep. Or at least, I hope I do. I know the world can feel strange sometimes, and some things just can't be explained. But tonight's story, well, it's about something that still haunts me, and I can't help but wonder if it's something that's still going on, even now. This is the story of the locker that opened by itself. My name's Alex. At the time, I was 22 years old, living in a small student hostel. The place wasn't much to look at. Thin walls, creaky floors, the smell of old carpet mixed with the occasional whiff of leftover takeout. But it was cheap, and for a student like me, that was enough. I was studying design, just trying to make it through the grind of coursework, assignments, and the occasional party to relieve the stress. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was mine. I had a roommate, Chris, but we weren't exactly the best of friends. He was always in his own world, never much of a talker. We'd bump into each other in the hallways or kitchen, share a few words, and then go on with our separate routines. No issues. Everything felt pretty normal, even boring at first. The hostel had a shared laundry room down in the basement, a few doors down from the communal kitchen. It was the kind of place where you could hear every little noise, the buzz of the dryer, the slosh of water in the pipes, the shuffle of shoes across the floor. One night, I had to go down to grab my laundry. It was about 11:30 p.m., dark outside, the cold air creeping in through the cracked window in the hall. I didn't think much of it, just grabbed my stuff, threw it in the dryer, and was about to head back upstairs when I heard something strange. A faint creak, like a door opening. Now, there's a lot of weird sounds in a building like that. The old pipes, the settling foundation, but this was different. It was slow, deliberate, like someone was carefully turning the handle of a door. I glanced over at the hallway leading to the lockers. They were just a row of metal boxes lined against the wall, small. Enough to hold a few personal items, but not really big enough for anything major. They were mostly just there for storage, nothing special. But in the dim light, I saw it. One of the lockers was slightly ajar. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe someone had forgotten to close it properly. People were always in a rush around here. But as I stepped closer, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The lock. It wasn't just ajar, it was hanging open on its own, as if someone had deliberately left it that way. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, wondering if maybe I was just imagining things. I shook my head and went back upstairs, trying to push the unease away. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it had just been my mind playing tricks. The next night, the same thing happened. I'd just come back from grabbing some dinner with a couple of friends when I noticed the same locker again, open, just a crack. But this time, I could have sworn I'd closed it the night before. I stood there in the hallway for a moment, my heart pounding a little faster than usual. I don't know why it bothered me so much, but it did. I told myself I was being stupid. It was probably just a coincidence. People didn't just mess with other people's things, right? But the locker kept opening every night. I started to pay attention more carefully, Each time I passed it, I'd check. Sometimes it was just slightly open. Other times it was wide enough to see the empty space inside. But nothing ever seemed out of place in the locker itself. No strange objects, no notes, no obvious signs of tampering. But after about a week of this, I noticed something else. There were small things, little changes, like the items inside had been shifted around. A book that I'd left in the back was now in the front. A pen that had been on the left side of the shelf was now on the right. No one ever seemed to notice anything, and I didn't want to sound paranoid, but it felt off. It didn't feel right. Then, one night, I walked down to the basement again, a bit later than usual. It was a Saturday, and I had just finished a group project, so I was feeling a little worn out. As I stepped into the basement, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A faint noise, like the sound of fabric shifting. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was coming from the locker. I couldn't believe it. The locker, my locker, was opening by itself. The door wasn't just ajar anymore. It was swinging open, slowly, creaking on its hinges. I don't know what possessed me, but I walked over to it, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet of the basement. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as I reached for the door. But just before I touched it, something caught my eye. A small stack of photographs. They were tucked inside the locker, leaning against the side as if they'd been placed there carefully. I don't remember putting them there. I didn't even recognize the photos at first. But as I flipped through them, my heart sank. They were photos of me, sleeping in my bed. The first picture showed me, completely unaware, lying in the exact position I had been in my hostel bed just the night before. The second one was even closer, a close-up shot of my face taken from the side, with the faint light of the street lamp outside casting strange shadows on my face. The third one was taken from above. I could tell it was taken while I was asleep because there were no lights on in the room and I hadn't moved. But who could have taken these? I'd been alone the whole time. I shoved the photos back into the locker and slammed the door shut. My breath was coming faster now. I felt dizzy, like I was on the verge of a panic attack. How was this happening? I went back to my room, but I couldn't sleep. Not that night. Not the next night. I started to watch the locker more carefully, but nothing changed. It still opened by itself every single night, but I didn't dare touch it again. I couldn't. Eventually, I tried to talk to Chris. Maybe he was messing with me. I had no idea why he'd do something like that, but I had to ask. "Chris, have you been messing with my locker?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at me, genuinely confused. "What? No. Why?" "Someone's been messing with it," I said, still trying to make sense of everything. "Things keep getting moved around, and I keep finding photos of me, sleeping." Chris just stared at me like I was crazy. "Dude, you're probably just stressed out. Maybe you're not locking it properly." I wanted to scream at him, but I didn't. I just nodded, told him it was probably nothing, and walked away. But it wasn't nothing. The photos kept appearing. More of me, in different poses, from different angles. They seemed to get closer, too. Closer to the bed, closer to my face. At one point, I even found a picture of me standing in front of my mirror, staring blankly at my reflection, but there was no one in the room with me. I started locking my door at night, checking the windows, and even setting up a camera in my room. But every time I tried to catch the person responsible, I came up empty. Nothing. No one. But the locker kept opening. The photos kept coming. And then one day, the photos stopped. That was the last I saw of them. And I thought it was over. But I could never shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Even now, years later, I lock my doors tighter, double-check the windows before bed, and still feel that constant unease, like someone or something is always just outside my vision, waiting. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happened, it's knowing it could happen again. If you made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more stories that might just keep you up at night.